Hi there. Making a list of the worst and best emperors of Rome seems to be a quite popular discipline on the internet. And recently I finished the video on the brief history of the Principate, which covers the emperors from Augustus to Severus Alexander. And now I think I'm ready to participate. But I'm not gonna make a list of, top 10 or 20 best or worst emperors. It will be more like a discussion. I honestly believe that all of these best and worst emperors lists are, although they're actually sometimes really fun and entertaining, but essentially it is comparable to some sort of a Special Olympics. It's just inherently intellectually flawed. Flawed but fun. So yeah, let's give it a go. So first of all, I'm not gonna discuss all of the emperors of Rome, and I'm not even gonna venture into the crisis of the 3rd century and the dominant. I limit myself with the Principate. I know that there's a school of thought that tries to include all of the crisis of the 3rd century into the Principate. I believe this kind of periodization of Roman history is not very productive. The sources for the crisis of the 3rd century are really, really bad. I mean, all of the Roman history has a certain problem with the sources. But after Severus Alexander, the situation becomes just horrible. The crisis of the 3rd century is dominated by Historia Augusta and stuff like epitomes of Roman history by Eutropius or much later sources. And then, starting with the Diocletian, things are somehow even worse. We have lots of incredibly biased Christian sources that just make stuff up and destroy and dumb down pretty much everything. So, if you're making a list that tries to cover pretty much everything from, say, Augustus to the so called Follow the West, you're in trouble. I mean, you can't do stuff like, okay, here's Severus Alexander, the last emperor of the actual Principate, and someone like Carinus, one of the last or the last emperor of the crisis of the 3rd century. Okay, you have these two guys, and now compare and contrast them. So we could figure out, the worst and the best emperors. That just doesn't make sense. That's just stupid. With emperors like Carinus, we can't even be 100% sure that this person actually ever existed. We're quite sure with Severus Alexander, but Carinus and people like Numerian, you cannot be 100% sure. It's just a mess. You have people killed by lightning, all of these nice stories from Historia Augusta. And then you move to a period where emperors kept bears and were feeding people to them, according to Ammianus Marcellinus. This is just ridiculous. So yeah, since I have this huge video about the brief history of the Principate, I will limit myself to a period where we actually can talk about something. Augustus to Severus Alexander. Now, what makes all of these Special Olympics is that you can't just go and say, this is a good emperor and this is a bad emperor. It makes a lot of sense sometimes, but as you probably noticed, this good guy, bad guy stuff is mostly completely unrealistic. Once in a while, if you look at the list of the emperors, you probably can say that this guy was a horrible human being and that guy was a great human being. But all of them most of them were usually just people. They were neither good or bad as human beings or as the emperors. They were just, people. Even if the historians try to present everything according to their bias or political situation. People sometimes don't take this into account, If you go and check the list of the worst and best emperors on YouTube or on Quora or whatever, another huge problem is that you can have a really capable emperor who was unlucky to live during some seriously complex times. And he just didn't have the opportunity to show all of his capabilities, or he had to manage one crisis or another all the time. The same thing can be applied to situations when the times were quite nice, peaceful, and everything just goes your way. All you have to do is try your best not to screw things up. That's why all of these comparisons are sometimes really flawed. In the end, it leads us to a strange situation. When you're talking about good or bad emperors, what are the criteria? We need a set of criteria to judge these people. And obviously, a guy who's good at one or two things on our list can be at the same time really bad at two or three other things on our list of criteria. So, how do you make some common denominator to figure out stuff? It's all really complex and, yeah, inherently a little bit dumb. Although, yeah, we obviously can admit that some emperors were more capable and others were less capable, as you know, statesmen, for example. Okay, let's try to deal with all this mess, and we will start with, yeah, the criteria. And we will see who excelled at something and who didn't. And our first nomination, or category, or whatever, will be a thing that is frequently overlooked by many people: happiness. I mean, not the happiness of a particular emperor, but the happiness of his subjects. Because that's what really matters. People like stuff like expansion of the empire or successful wars. But in the end, what usually matters, maybe not the most, but matters a lot, is the happiness of people who actually live in this country. And you cannot really measure happiness, although you can try. And actually, we don't have enough information about the Roman Empire to successfully quantify all of this. But when we're talking about happiness, what we can do, it's the only reasonable approach, is to check for the things that are cherished by modern people. And they don't usually care that much about glorious military campaigns somewhere overseas. I mean, that's pretty good for patriotic reasons or something like that. But usually people care most about quite simple things, like healthy economy, stability, and personal safety. Obviously, the peak of this stability, personal safety, and all that stuff is the reign of the so-called five good emperors, minus Nerva. So if we're trying to measure the success or the worth of the emperor using the criteria of happiness, it all goes down to three or four people, and the winner is probably Antoninus Pius. Hooray! He had a very quiet, very prosperous reign that lasted more than 20 years. Indeed, we don't really have much sources on Antoninus, but from all the information we have, it was probably the happiest of times. Antoninus never screwed things up. The economy was in a very healthy state. No outrageous wars, very competent administration, no cataclysms. Most of the monumental architectural wonders of Hadrian and Trajan are already there. Go and observe. Of course, Antoninus Pius was very lucky. He inherited a prosperous state. Nothing bad was happening, like Persians invading once again. Just a very capable ruler with an excellent moral character, doing his job properly. Everyone liked it, and basically the name Antoninus later became a title synonymous with prosperity. Now, if we're talking about the worst emperors of Rome, it becomes really complex because the times when people were mostly unhappy were quite probably the times of the civil wars. But it's quite stupid to say that, okay, in terms of happiness of the general population, the worst emperor was someone like, I don't know, Otho, who ruled for just 3 months. It's just ridiculous. So if you're not counting the times of turmoil, unless they last for a really long time, we must find someone from the period of instability who was really hard on everybody. And when I say hard on everybody, I don't mean senatorial class. Because, you see, most of the whining in the historical sources is coming from the senatorial class. When they are talking about horrible, terrible persecution of everyone, purges, everyone dies, and stuff like that, they're not talking about the general population. They're talking about the people of the senatorial rank. So all of these horrible persecutions were most of the time just, 100 senators were killed and that's it. It's not like a genocide or something. We cannot go with someone like Domitian or Nero or Gaius Caligula, who, as we're told, tortured senators and liked it. People were mostly okay with that. It's just the senators who were unhappy. But since we absolutely have to pick somebody, I'd probably say that maybe we should go with Caracalla. I mean, he was doing some pretty useless stuff and reportedly even sacked the city of Alexandria for basically nothing. And overall, the times of the Severans were not the happiest times, actually. Now, the next nomination on our list, administration. The administrative skill of the ruler, the overall work of the government, and probably even political tenacity of the emperor or something like that. So, in terms of the administration, well, we mentioned Antoninus Pius and how he was doing a great job, but he had all the opportunities in the world to do a great job. There are other emperors who were good at managing stuff even under complicated circumstances. For example, Marcus Aurelius was doing a really good job given the stuff that was happening during his reign. Vespasian ended the civil war and reformed the state. Trajan, who set the new direction for the empire, in a way. But if we need to choose one person, then it's probably Augustus, who actually started the whole thing and created the blueprint for everything. He established a Principate. He ruled for 40 years, and he was a person of immense political talent. So, in terms of administration, I'd go with Augustus. And when we're talking about the opposite of Augustus, which means absolutely incapable administrator, again it becomes really complex. Because when we're talking about Augustus and his political system, we're talking about, about Augustus himself. But many emperors never really cared much about running the government, so they tried to delegate everything to somebody else, which is quite normal. The emperor is never just one guy who controls everything. No, they all have their administration, a group of people who actually run the government over a certain period of time. When we're talking about someone like Nero, for example, who notoriously, especially early in his reign, didn't care much about running the government. Even if he were into running day-to-day operations, when you're 16, you're no one. You just cannot do this. He had very capable administrators for that. How do we measure stuff here? His administration was really good, but he didn't care about doing anything himself. But his subordinates, so to speak, cared a lot. And what should we do with the figurehead emperors like Severus Alexander or even Elagabalus? Indeed, Elagabalus was incompetent, but he was 14 years old. Anyway, it was a question of his administration. He was more or less a puppet of probably his mother and his grandmother. How do we measure this? But if I have to pick somebody, I'd pick, yeah, Elagabalus. Because he kind of satisfies both of the possible criteria. Not only he was absolutely incapable of running the government, but his administration was also super weird. Next thing, which is frequently overlooked, is cultural achievements. I mean, this is quite important as well. In modern times, we actually talk about cultural achievements or stuff like that a lot. We value this. But somehow, when we're talking about ancient times, we tend to ignore it and discuss, I don't know, military operations. The Roman Empire is long gone. I mean, ancient Roman Empire. We're not discussing the Holy Roman Empire or the German nation or something. Ancient Rome is long gone, but the remains of the empire are still there and they are still awe inspiring. Take a look at the Pantheon or the Flavian Amphitheater. Go and read Virgil or Seneca. So that's something that must be taken into account. Usually it is somehow linked with the happiness we were discussing before, which means the times of prosperity. But it is not the same. And when we're talking about culture, it's really, really hard. As well, you can't just single out a certain period of time when all of the great construction works happened, or all of the great works of art produced, or all of the great literature was written. I will probably mention two or three main periods here, just for your consideration. And the first will be the time of Augustus, who spent 4 decades doing all sorts of things, including building stuff and promoting art. You must remember that Augustus, through Maecenas sometimes, was the patron of arts, which includes literature. We don't have much literature left from the Roman period. We have some. And you know that, for example, Virgil's Aeneid was written and basically commissioned by Augustus. It is one of the most important works of Roman literature. Then we must mention cultural achievements of the Flavian emperors, and the Flavian amphitheater, Colosseum, is still there. You can go and take a look. At the peak of the construction of monumental buildings came at the times of Trajan and Hadrian. So once again, we're moving to the times of the five good emperors. And stuff built by Trajan, and first and foremost Hadrian, is still incredible. And Hadrian was probably some kind of architectural genius himself. Or at least he had some really nice high concepts, and then he hired the people who could actually work with his ideas and make them happen. So, if we have to pick one patron of the arts, then I'd say we're choosing between Augustus and Hadrian. But I will go with Hadrian actually. Take a look at the Pantheon, take a look at the Hadrian's villa, take a look at the mausoleum of Hadrian. Let's go with Hadrian. Now, who's gonna be the culturally worst emperor? Well, not counting people like Otho or Didius Julianus, who created nothing. Why? Oh, yeah, there were reasons. Or Pertinax. Why? There were reasons for that. What is interesting here is that even objectively quite unsuccessful emperors like Caracalla were doing quite well in terms of, erecting monumental buildings. Take a look at the Cyclopean baths of Caracalla. It's really hard to pick somebody who was exceptionally bad at this, especially since Roman emperors were really into the cult of personality. All of them were at least constructing something, even if it was just statues of themselves. And none of them was into destruction of everything for one reason or another. You probably maybe have to be Theodosius for that. But Theodosius is not within the scope of this video. And stories of Nero started the Great Fire of Rome are ridiculous and unbelievable. So in the end, I'd pick Elagabalus again. Yeah, he was building stuff. He built the temple of his solar deity. Uh, Bad idea. His ideas of culture were quite weird and offensive, to say the least, if you trust the historians. And first and foremost, I'm talking about his religious reforms, not the anecdotes about, acting like a lady. So yeah, Elagabalus again. Why not? Next thing, military operations and general safety of the frontier, expansions, etc. This is not as important, probably, like cultural achievements, personal safety, and happiness of the population. But sometimes, all of this happiness and culture are consequences of the military operations if they are done properly and for a certain reason, and not just for the sake of having a nice little victorious campaign for the PR or something. There are many candidates again. Augustus is not really known for his tremendous military achievements, but he expanded the borders of the empire. He more or less integrated Egypt or merged with Egypt, which was an accomplishment in itself. Together with Mark Antony, they won the Civil War, and then again, he won the war against Mark Antony and Egypt. That's something. Then we have people like Vespasian, who was really successful, plus he won the Civil War. Just like Septimius Severus, who won the Civil War and had very successful military campaigns. He's actually one of the candidates here as well. And then we have Trajan. And if you have to pick one, then you're probably obliged to pick Trajan. That's more or less obvious. Now, we kind of have to find the opposite of Trajan. But it's not gonna be the opposite. It shouldn't be the opposite. Because some of the emperors were not participating and not promoting the military campaigns. Because, they didn't need them. You can say that the opposite of Trajan was someone like Antoninus Pius. But that's insane. Potentially, you can pick someone like Gaius Caligula based on the stories of how he decided to punish the sea, which is a ridiculous anecdote in the first place. And he actually expanded the empire. He annexed Mauritania. So you can make fun of Caracalla and his obsession with Alexander the Great. But he never really seriously screwed up. It is also easy to pick some emperor from the periods of civil wars. This guy fought the Civil War, and then he lost the Civil War, so he was probably military incompetent. But that's not really what we're talking about here right now. Once again, we can't go and say, okay, Otho was unsuccessful because he lost the Civil War in a really stupid fashion. He could win the war against Vitellius. He'd probably be defeated by Vespasian later on, but anyway, he could fight effectively with Vitellius. But instead, he decided to kill himself for some unknown reason. That hardly makes him the opposite of Trajan. You could say that it was in fact Hadrian, because he literally decided to give back some of the territories conquered by Trajan, to give it back to Parthians, in a way that really makes him the opposite of Trajan. But that's misleading, and Hadrian had all the reasons to return the territories. It wasn't because he was weak or stupid or something like that. It was very logical. If you cannot control, sustain, and develop these territories, then what should you do? Spend another 50 years trying to defend the piece of land you don't really need? At this point, you probably expect that I will nominate Elagabalus once again, but no. At least he, or his family, to be more precise, won the civil war against Macrinus. Technically, his family, wasn't that incompetent. It's hard to choose, but I'd probably go with Severus Alexander. or his administration, and personally his mother. Their approach towards the war with Parthia or Germanic tribes was, let's say, counterproductive, and it backfired a lot. Now, the next nomination, which is also very important in my opinion. The character of the emperor. Was he a virtuous person or a horrible human being? It is very important on a personal level, and it seems it is less important when we're dealing with the leader of the state. Or again, so it seems, in the opinion of the cynical people who are very much into realpolitik. But I've read Plato, so I tend to disagree. I believe it's important. Who was the best in terms of the character? Well, as I mentioned in the beginning of this video, most people are just people who are neither exceptionally good nor exceptionally bad. They are more or less normal given the circumstances. Well, provided that they don't engage in sexual intercourse before marriage and don't eat pork, obviously. We will include in the list people of exceptional qualities. And the emperors who stand out here are Marcus Aurelius and Antoninus Pius. To some extent, maybe also Hadrian, but I know some people will argue with that. I even saw some wild opinions somewhere like on Quora that Hadrian was probably the worst Roman emperor because, based on a couple of unreliable religious sources, you can try to accuse him of genocide. I believe that we're choosing between Marcus Aurelius and Antoninus Pius here. I know that there's a horde of fanboys of Marcus Aurelius who read his meditations, and no matter what, they'll be like, he was the best, he was the bestest ever. And now they're like, say it's Marcus, say it now. Yeah, it's Marcus Aurelius. Now, who was the worst human being among the emperors? Again, we're dealing with the bias of the historians. Some of the emperors were portrayed as total caricatures. If the emperor is considered bad, then he's like really, really bad. They will exaggerate everything. And on the list, we will obviously have the usual suspects, like Gaius Caligula, like Nero, like Commodus, and Elagabalus, maybe. But if you look closely at all of these guys, it's just too hard to separate truth from fiction. And everything wasn't that bad, probably. I'd probably go with the angriest man in the world, which is Caracalla. He was not the subject of really weird slandering like Nero or Gaius Caligula. I mean, in the case of Nero, it is hard to forgive the fact that he essentially killed Seneca. But he wasn't really a total monster imbecile as he was presented later. And Gaius Caligula is a complicated question, which probably maybe includes his illness. There are stories that he enjoyed torturing senators, and I mean that if Suetonius and Cassius Dio say this, you can probably ignore this. But if Seneca says this, then, in my opinion, it's a more reliable source of information. But I'd go with Caracalla, this spoiled Carthaginian/Syrian cruel and militaristic kid of Septimius Severus, who actually also killed his brother, which is like cherry on top. We can make up some other additional criteria, nominations for our list, but let's keep this video relatively short. So now we have 5 nominations and 5 people here and 5 people there. Well, there's actually 3 names on the bad guys list. So we need to pick, overall champion of this Special Olympics. Let's start with the worst emperor, actually. There's a whole list of the Severans. Obviously, who else could it be? And we're kind of choosing between Caracalla, Elagabalus, and the best of them all, Severus Alexander. But overall, I'd probably say that when we're dealing with the question of the worst emperors in general, we should also look at the immediate, short term, and long term consequences of the reign. Apart from these three guys, we also must have a couple of other people. That's probably Commodus, because he pretty much ended the golden age of the empire and made the chaos of the civil war possible once again. And then we have Septimius Severus, who actually was a capable general and he ended the civil war, but he installed a very different order of things. And even if Septimius Severus was, yeah, cruel and militaristic dictator, and a Carthaginian dictator, I should say, but he was competent. He personally wasn't all that bad. But his regime, with his weird family on top, his successors, the Severan slash Amason dynasty, just really screwed everything up. In a way, the crisis of the 3rd century is not a work of Severus Alexander and his mother. It is mostly the result of the actions of Septimius Severus, the architect of the demise of the Roman Empire. So I'd choose Septimius Severus as the worst emperor because of the horrible consequences of his reign. And now we need to pick the best emperor. We have truly great people on the list. That's some fierce competition and a tough choice. But probably not for me. I've read Plato, I mean, pretty much all of his works, and it left me slightly deformed. I honestly believe that the best ruler is the philosopher king. When in doubt, you should always vote for the philosopher king. That's the right thing to do. That's the only reasonable option. This is the only way. Everything else is a travesty. So that leaves me with Marcus Aurelius. And there you have it. I tried my best to make this Special Olympics reasonable or at least entertaining. We have two winners. Septimius Severus is the worst emperor, and Marcus Aurelius is the best. And now you can destroy me in the comment section of the video. So thanks for watching, and see you soon.